After the end of the Second World War, direct remnants of its machinery of destruction began to surface. For years, what had been buried or sealed off appeared without warning. They were not ruins. They were tools made to kill. One of them was a Soviet aircraft designed for low-altitude attacks. It was armed with a cannon mounted on its nose. Its structure was built to strike without warning at close range against moving targets. It did not seek altitude, only immediate damage. A military mortar loaded with active explosives also appeared. It had not exploded. Any contact could have detonated it. Its function was to cause casualties at short range with direct damage. And like these, many more were left scattered in different places. They were not removed. They were not documented. They simply remained where they had last been used. What were the most terrifying discoveries that still continue to appear, decades after the greatest war of the century? The secret complex of Unit 731 discovered in Pingfang, China. In 1945, when the Soviet army entered Manchuria, it found a walled complex on the outskirts of Pingfang, an industrial suburb south of Harbin. The troops thought it was a factory. The facility covered 6 square kilometers. It had more than 70 buildings. What they found inside were not assembly lines or typical offices. There were sealed rooms with ventilation systems, sterile zones, empty laboratories, surgical tables and vacant cages. There were no workers, only freshly burned walls, destroyed file cabinets, and traces of what had once been a large-scale medical installation. In the surrounding area, they found pits with human remains. Some were whole, others had been cut in half or showed signs of unclosed surgery. The records had been incinerated. There were no names, no charts, no printed orders, only a few loose documents. One of them mentioned Unit 731. Shortly afterward, interrogations of Japanese prisoners revealed that this site had been the main base of a secret biological and chemical experimentation program run by the Imperial Army. According to the testimonies, bacteriological weapons were tested there. Operations on humans without anesthesia were also carried out. What had functioned for years as a hidden laboratory was now exposed. The area was secured. Civilian access was prohibited. Soviet technicians collected soil samples, analyzed remains, and photographed the facilities. The reports were then taken to Moscow. During the Khabarovsk trial, held in 1949, several former members of Unit 731 admitted to having worked in Pingfang. They detailed the functions of the site: virus testing, development of bombs loaded with plague, cholera and typhus, experiments involving body freezing, vivisections and aerial dispersal of bacteria. The confession was used as evidence by the court. It was the first time the name Unit 731 was publicly mentioned in a judicial proceeding. After the trial, the Soviets kept the site under observation. It was not demolished. Only entrances were sealed and main areas closed off. Over time, the complex became abandoned. Some buildings deteriorated. Others were repurposed for industrial use. Most of it was left without maintenance. The site's existence was known only to the military, local authorities, and some researchers. It did not appear on maps. There was no sign. In the 1980s, when Soviet documents began to be declassified, Pingfang came back into public discussion. Some Chinese journalists traveled to the area. They confirmed that several buildings were still standing. They managed to enter some structures. They filmed images of brick walls with barred windows, iron-sealed doors, dust-covered rooms, and fragments of rusted medical instruments. In the 1990s, Japanese and Chinese researchers began a joint project to locate physical evidence of biological activity. Excavations were organized in the complex's courtyards. They found broken jars with Japanese labels, medical needles, charred bone remains, and metal parts of ceramic bombs. The samples were analyzed by forensic teams. Several contained traces of infectious agents. In 1995, a deeper inspection was carried out. An underground refrigeration chamber was found. Inside were closed metal boxes. Some contained organs in formaldehyde. Others were empty. There were also surgical trays, decomposing work clothes, and partial building plans. Everything was catalogued, sealed, and sent to laboratories in Beijing. The Chinese government confirmed the existence of the center. It acknowledged that it had been used to develop prohibited weapons. It was declared a historical site. In the year 2000, work began to transform part of the place into a museum. The main facades were restored, the perimeter was cleaned, walkways were installed for visitors, a gallery with documentary material was set up. In 2001, the Unit 731 Museum in Pingfang was officially inaugurated. The site came under state supervision. It was open to the public with guided tours. Visitors can walk through the original hallways, see the cells, enter some of the surgery rooms, and observe items found during the excavations. The structure was not modified, everything was preserved as it was found. Among the items on display are syringes, scalpels, models of bacteriological bombs, medical manuals, jars with human organs, and bone fragments. There are also photographs taken by Soviet soldiers in 1945. The exhibits include complex blueprints, maps of affiliated units, and recorded testimonies from survivors. The museum also contains part of the documentation recovered by the Soviets. Among those papers are laboratory reports, lists of patients with numerical codes, and diagrams of airborne bacteria dispersal. Some pages include technical drawings of bombs with glass compartments for transporting infected insects. In 2010, a new excavation uncovered a trench with more than 100 human remains. They were exhumed and analyzed by Chinese experts. Most were adult males, although bones of minors were also found. They showed marks of surgical cuts, untreated fractures, and signs of freezing. The analyses confirmed they were not soldiers or medical staff. They were test subjects. In 2015, an international team validated the authenticity of the museum's structures. They verified that the construction materials matched those used by the Japanese army between 1936 and 1945. They also confirmed the presence of anthrax and cholera traces in the soil of certain areas of the complex. Today, the site remains active as a memorial center. Filming is prohibited outside designated zones. Taking photos inside the medical rooms is not allowed. Every visit is accompanied by authorized personnel. Pamphlets with dates, names, and access routes of Unit 731 in other parts of China are distributed. The museum receives school visits, foreign delegations, and human rights commissions. It has also been the subject of study by war historians and bioethics specialists. The information presented is based exclusively on evidence found on site or official documents obtained after the Japanese surrender. A monument with the names of the main identified victims was placed on the outer perimeter. The list is partial. There is no confirmed total number. Estimates vary, but most scholars agree that more than 3,000 people died inside the complex. Tens of thousands more were affected by field tests. The site was also included on the list of protected areas by the Chinese government. No new constructions are allowed on the grounds. No businesses can be established nearby. Every 13th of August, a commemorative ceremony is held. Offerings are placed at the entrance. Victims' relatives, survivors, and diplomatic representatives participate. In recent years, new generations of researchers have proposed digitizing all the material found in Pingfang. The goal is to create an accessible archive for universities and human rights institutes. More than 10,000 pages of records, medical files, photographs, and diagrams have already been scanned. The Pingfang base is to this day the only biological weapons center from the Second World War that was found intact, with preserved physical remains, documentation, and structure. It is not a reconstruction. It is not a replica. It is the real site discovered after the Japanese army's retreat, without having been altered in its original design. While other similar laboratories were destroyed or sealed forever, this one was exposed by discoveries on the ground. Its value lies not only in the data it provided, it also shows how a biological warfare program operated in practice, sustained by a modern state during a global conflict. Today, Pingfang does not speak, but it does not need to. Everything that was done is recorded in the walls, the pits, and the documents that survived the fire. The Nazi eagle recovered from the bottom of the sea in Uruguay. On the coast of Montevideo in Uruguay, a bronze piece weighing 383 kilograms was found. It was the figure of an eagle with open wings, holding a swastika. It had been underwater since 1939. It was part of the ornament mounted on the stern of the German battleship Admiral Graf Spee. That ship was one of the first to be sunk during the Second World War. After destroying several British merchant vessels, it was intercepted by the Allied fleet in the South Atlantic. The confrontation took place near the Rio de la Plata. The Graf Spee sought refuge in the port of Montevideo, but received no support. Its captain ordered an evacuation and scuttling to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Since then, its remains lay underwater a few kilometers from the coast. The sculpture was recovered by a private salvage team decades after the sinking. They used special cranes and professional divers. It was a lengthy operation, as the piece was embedded and covered in silt. When they brought it up, it still retained its original shape. It only showed wear from time and water. The Uruguayan government allowed the sculpture to be shown in public. It was exhibited in Montevideo, in a protected area under surveillance. Crowds came to see it. The figure sparked opposing reactions. Some wanted to view it as part of naval history. Others demanded its removal due to the symbol it bore. The controversy intensified when official complaints arrived. The German government requested that the piece not be used for promotional purposes or displayed out of context. Germany does not allow the exhibition of Nazi symbols except in museums or educational spaces. They did not want the figure to be used in campaigns, isolated images, or as an object of interest without explanation. The request was clear: it should remain part of a historical process and not be treated as a trophy. Facing that diplomatic pressure, Uruguay decided to auction it. The piece did not remain in public hands. It was offered to private buyers with certain conditions on its use. The proceeds went to the company that had recovered it from the seabed. Details of the sale and the name of the buyer were not made public. The figure was withdrawn from circulation and was not displayed again. The case of the Graf Spee eagle was one of the few instances where an object of that type, with symbolic weight and direct connection to the Nazi regime, was extracted intact from a shipwreck. Most of the time, such remains stay at the bottom as part of the ship, but here the extraction was technical, documented, and initially faced no legal opposition. Today, the site of the sinking remains marked on nautical maps. The rest of the vessel has not been removed. Only some minor parts were salvaged in earlier operations. The Graf Spee remains in the water as it was, and the eagle that once crowned it went from being submerged for decades to becoming the center of diplomatic debate, until it once again disappeared from public view. The hidden treasure of General Yamashita in the Philippines. For years, many people have spoken about an alleged treasure that Japanese soldiers supposedly left buried in the Philippines at the end of the Second World War. It is said to consist of gold bars, jewels, and objects stolen from various Asian countries. All of it would be hidden in tunnels, caves, or secret passageways. The story is connected to the name of General Tomoyuki Yamashita, who commanded the Japanese forces in that area. According to some accounts, while the Japanese army was retreating, they used prisoners and forced laborers to dig underground hiding places. There, they stored the shipments. When the work was done, they sealed everything with dynamite and left those who had dug trapped, so they could not reveal the secret. For a long time, no clear evidence was found to confirm the story. Even so, there were people who dedicated themselves to searching for the treasure. Some claimed to have hand-drawn maps, while others said they had information passed on by soldiers. In the 1970s, a Filipino named Rogelio Roxas claimed to have found one of those caves. He said he had discovered a statue of Buddha made of solid gold and several chests filled with bars. According to his version, everything was stolen by the military shortly afterward. Roxas took the case to court and for years tried to prove that he had been the first to find the gold. He died before the matter was resolved, but his story was the one that made the most noise on this subject. Some witnesses who knew him said that he had indeed found something. Others believed he had made it up to become famous. There are theories claiming that the treasure was used by certain groups to finance secret operations during the Cold War. It has also been said that part of the gold was recovered by special agents and moved to private accounts. None of that could be confirmed with official documents. In the Philippines, there are areas where excavations are still carried out in the hope of finding something. Sometimes remains of boxes, old tools, or abandoned tunnels appear. But so far, no conclusive proof has come to light that the gold exists. The Japanese government has never acknowledged that such a treasure was moved. There are also no records detailing an official plan to hide wealth in the Philippines. Historians believe that there may have been thefts by some soldiers, but not on a large scale. Even so, the legend lives on. Those who believe in the story of Yamashita's treasure claim that there are still many unexplored caves, especially in mountainous and remote areas. Some even claim that traps or explosives were set to prevent anyone from finding it. Over time, the myth became part of local folklore. The British ship sunk with tons of silver in the Atlantic. In February of 1941, a British merchant ship named SS Gersopper was attacked by a German submarine while crossing the Atlantic. The vessel was carrying precious metals and was sunk to a depth of more than 4,000 meters near the coast of Ireland. On board, it carried nearly 220 tons of silver. The location of the sinking remained unknown for decades. The ship had departed from India bound for Great Britain, but had to divert to Ireland due to a fuel shortage. It travelled alone, unprotected, because it had separated from its original convoy. That made it an easy target for German submarines, which were lying in wait in that area. The attack was swift. A torpedo struck the hull and the ship sank within minutes. Only one of the 85 crew members survived. He was found on a raft days later, suffering from burns and dehydration. The rest perished at sea. The silver cargo was destined for the British Treasury. It was part of a payment agreed upon with other countries to finance war efforts. For many years, the ship's location was a mystery. It was known from records that it carried silver, but there was no exact position. The seafloor in that part of the Atlantic is very deep, which made any search difficult. Furthermore, the passage of time had erased many useful references. In 2011, the American company Odyssey Marine Exploration launched an expedition to locate the SS Gersopper. They used advanced technology and underwater maps to scan the area. After several attempts, they managed to find the shipwreck. It was broken in two, but in generally good condition. Images showed parts of the hull, remnants of the cargo, and personal items of the crew. The discovery was considered a technical success. The team managed to recover more than 100 tons of silver bars. It was one of the largest recoveries of precious metals from the ocean floor in history. The entire process was documented and overseen by British authorities. The cargo was transported on special ships to the United Kingdom. The agreement between the company and the British government stated that Odyssey would receive a percentage of the recovered value. The rest would be returned to the state. The bars were melted down and stored. Part of them was used to cover historical debts. The case of the SS Gersopper sparked debates over the ownership of sunken objects. Some groups believed the cargo should be left as a memorial. Others argued it was legitimate to recover it if the technology existed to do so. In this case, the British government granted permission because the ship belonged to them and the cargo's value was very high. There was also discussion about whether human remains should be recovered or only the metallic cargo. Since the wreck occurred in deep waters and a hazardous environment, the interior of the ship was not accessed beyond the visible areas. Precautions were taken not to disturb sensitive components. The salvage of the SS Gersopper demonstrated that even after more than 70 years, it is possible to locate and recover valuable cargoes from the Second World War. Advances in underwater technology made it possible to reach places once thought inaccessible. Today, the ship's remains lie at the bottom of the sea, marked by coordinates and protected by international agreements. The site is considered a war grave. Access is not permitted without authorization. What was recovered was only what was visible and allowed under protocol. The SS Gersopper went from being a story lost in records to a real case of historical recovery. Its discovery showed how much still lies beneath the ocean and how war left traces even where they cannot be seen. The secret chamber with SS symbols in Woolsburg Castle. In central Germany, near the village of Büren, there is a stone castle called Wewelsburg. It has a triangular shape and sits atop a hill. During the Nazi regime, Heinrich Himmler chose it as the symbolic headquarters of the SS. It was remodeled to become a place with special meaning. They wanted it to be a center for training, ceremony, and study. In the lower part of the castle, a circular hall was built using dark stone blocks. It had a vaulted ceiling, a slab in the center, and 12 niches along the sides. Some believe these spaces were meant for the most important members of the group. On the floor, there is a large stone symbol resembling a black sun with 12 rays. That design does not appear in other official Nazi sites. It is thought to have been created solely for that place. The construction work at the castle was overseen by the SS. They used prisoners from the nearby concentration camp for the heavy labor. Many of them died during the building process. The project included tunnels, secret passages, and other underground chambers. Not everything was completed. Some parts remained unused due to lack of time and resources. After the war, the Allies took control of the site. They examined the records, the structures, and what was left in the rooms. For years, the castle remained closed. Later it was opened to the public as a museum. Several parts were restored, including the underground hall. The symbol on the floor sparked many theories. Some said it had a magical or esoteric meaning. Others saw it as a way to represent power and order. There are no documents explaining its exact function. It is only known that Himmler visited the site frequently and considered it special. Visitors who enter the hall notice the silence, the cold stones, and the symmetrical layout of the space. There are no windows or decorations. Everything is designed to give an impression of weight and control. Light enters through a small opening at the top. At certain times of the day, the beam illuminates the center of the room. Woolsburg Castle was one of the few spaces the Nazis designed from a symbolic perspective. It was not a military base or an office. It was a place meant to represent an idea. The underground hall, with its figures and forms, is what draws the most attention from those who visit. Today, the site is preserved as a reminder of what was attempted there. No kind of tribute or gathering of extremist groups is allowed. There are clear controls and rules to prevent misunderstandings. What was once a private place of cult is now part of history, open to view and study without hiding what it represented. The active mortar that remained buried in Northern Ireland for 70 years. In a field in County Down in eastern Northern Ireland, a local man went out with his metal detector. His name was John Ross Magnate. He had experience in archaeological searches and knew how to act if he found dangerous remnants. What he did not expect was to come across an intact object from the Second World War. While scanning the terrain, the device gave off a strong signal. He began to dig and uncovered a long rusted metal structure buried at shallow depth. It was a mortar. The artifact showed signs of wear but retained its shape. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it still contained explosive material. It was TNT. It had not detonated. Ross Magnate left the device exactly as it was and called the authorities. He knew that moving it could trigger an explosion. The police arrived shortly after and cordoned off the area. They reported that the shell had remained active for more than 70 years. It contained 1 kilogram of explosive material. Although time had affected it, it was still dangerous. Technicians from the bomb disposal team examined the mortar using cameras, detectors, and pressure sensors. They confirmed that it had no internal stability. They decided to destroy it on site. At 10 o'clock the next morning, they detonated the charge in a controlled explosion. The blast was heard throughout the village. Neighbors came out of their homes. Some thought it was a military drill. Others believed an old object had accidentally exploded. The police explained that it was a projectile from the Second World War, forgotten for decades, which was still capable of detonating. The news caused concern. According to records, several Allied troop trainings took place in that region during the 1940s. Fields in Northern Ireland were used for explosives practice, maneuvers and simulations before D-Day. Many of those exercises were conducted without accurate documentation. Some projectiles did not explode and were buried without follow-up. That mortar was one of those that did not go off at the time. Apparently it had been covered by earth and time. If someone had struck it with machinery, it could have detonated. The discovery reopened the debate on how many war remnants are still hidden in rural areas of the United Kingdom. Ross Magnate was recognized for his actions. He did not attempt to move or disarm the object. He did the right thing. His prior military knowledge helped him follow protocol. It was not the first time he had found old remains, but it was the most dangerous. Authorities thanked him for having prevented a tragedy. After the incident, several fields in the area were inspected. More modern detection equipment was used to search for similar signals. No other active explosives were found, but remnants of metal, old tools, and harmless parts were recovered. Some property owners requested surveys of their fields to avoid surprises. The down projectile was another example of how the traces of war continue to emerge. It was not in a museum or on a battlefield, just in an ordinary field, meters from inhabited homes. It spent more than half a century underground, unseen, and it was on the verge of exploding. The Battleship Mousashi, found at the bottom of the sea by a technology billionaire. During the Second World War, Japan built 2 giant battleships named Yamato and Musashi. They were the largest warships of their time. They had enormous guns, extremely thick armor, and the capacity to carry thousands of people. The Musashi was completed in 1942 and participated in several operations before being sunk. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Musashi was attacked by American aircraft. It took dozens of hits from bombs and torpedoes. The ship resisted for hours, but in the end, it listed and sank. More than 1,000 crew members died. Those who survived were rescued by other Japanese ships. For a long time, the exact location of the sinking was not known with certainty. In 2015, American businessman Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, announced that his team had found the remains of the Musashi. They used a modern vessel equipped with underwater search technology. After several days of scanning the Sibuyan Sea off the coast of the Philippines, they detected a metallic structure on the seabed. When they sent a camera-equipped robot, they confirmed it was the Musashi. The images showed part of the hull, broken guns, and pieces of the command bridge. Everything was at a depth of more than 1,000 meters. Although the ship was heavily damaged, several parts were well preserved. Experts were able to identify it thanks to technical details and visible markings. Paul Allen shared the images online and said it was an honor to have located the ship. He also expressed respect for those who died aboard. No objects were recovered from the site. It was considered a war grave and was left untouched. The discovery of the Musashi was important for several reasons. First, because it solved a naval mystery. Second, because it used advanced civilian technology for a task previously carried out only by governments. And third, because it helped to remember a key episode of the war in the Pacific. The ship had been built with great effort by Imperial Japan. It was designed for fleet engagements, but the nature of the war changed and aircraft carriers became dominant. When the Musashi was sent to Leyte, it no longer had the same strategic value. Still, it was deployed as a symbol of strength. The American air attack was relentless and well coordinated. The Musashi withstood heavy damage before sinking. The fact that it went down so far from shore made its location difficult for decades. The area was very deep and lacked clear reference points. The discovery also helped provide context to other battles in the region. It allowed historians to better study the route of the Japanese convoy and the military decisions of that moment. The seafloor images showed how the structure remained after the impact of the bombs. Today, the remains of the Musashi lie at the bottom of the sea. They are protected by international laws. Commercial exploration and tourism near the site are not allowed. It is a place marked by war and by the silence of those who never returned. The Spitfires buried in Burma after the end of the war. The Spitfire was a British fighter plane widely used during the Second World War. Due to its shape, speed, and maneuverability, it became a symbol of British aerial resistance. However, few know that several of these aircraft were buried at the end of the conflict, far from the United Kingdom. At the end of the war, a decision was made to hide a group of these planes in Burma, now called Myanmar. British authorities decided it was better to disassemble and bury them rather than bring them back home or leave them in the hands of the new local government. The reason was to prevent them from ending up in unwanted hands amid the political uncertainty that followed the war. According to reports, the parts of the Spitfires were stored separately in large wooden crates. These crates were buried in marked areas near former military airfields. The story circulated for decades as a legend among veterans and aviation experts. In 2012, a British farmer and aviation enthusiast named David Cundall led an attempt to unearth the aircraft. With help from private sponsors and permission from the Burmese government, a search began around Rangoon Airport. Expectations were high. Some claimed there were up to 20 units underground. Detection equipment and terrain analysis were used, but the results were inconclusive. Although excavations were carried out in several areas, no visible aircraft remains were found. The ground markings did not fully match historical maps. Signs of soil disturbance were discovered, but it was not confirmed what they were. The lack of solid evidence put the project on hold. Even so, many believe the Spitfires are still there, either in a different location or buried deeper. Some blame errors in old documents. Others think the planes were moved without leaving a trace. During the investigations, testimonies emerged from soldiers claiming to have participated in the burial. Reports from the British Army also surfaced, containing orders related to the transport and concealment of military material. That lent some weight to the version that the Spitfires were indeed buried. To this day, there is no physical evidence confirming the existence of those planes underground, but there is also no proof disproving it. The story remains alive among aviation enthusiasts and those seeking to recover historic pieces from the war. What makes this case special is that, if found, the Spitfires could be well preserved, having been stored in sealed crates and protected from the elements. Some believe they could even fly again after a full restoration. In the meantime, the search continues as a mix of historical exploration and personal adventure. It is one of the few cases in which aircraft are said to have been intentionally buried, not damaged in combat, but hidden by military decision. The Carrier Pigeon with a secret message trapped in an English chimney. In 2012, a resident of the village of Bletchingley in Surrey, England, made a curious discovery while renovating the chimney of his old house. Amid the soot and debris of the flue, he found the skeleton of a pigeon. What caught his attention was a small red tube tied with string to one of its legs. Inside the cylinder, there was still a rolled-up piece of paper with strange symbols. Unintentionally, the man had uncovered an unopened message from the Second World War. During the conflict, the United Kingdom revived an old method for sending sensitive information: carrier pigeons. More than 250,000 were trained by the National Pigeon Service. These birds crossed the English Channel from France, Belgium, or the Netherlands, carrying data on enemy movements, attack points, and troop positions. The pigeon found in Surrey most likely came from France and was headed to Bletchley Park, the British Army's code-breaking centre. That was where cryptographers worked to decode the enemy's secret messages. However, this pigeon never made it. It is believed it became disoriented, fell into the chimney, and got trapped without a way out. The message remained there, hidden for nearly 70 years. The paper was partially damaged, but still readable. It contained a combination of letters and numbers in short groups. Cryptography experts from the BBC and GCHQ, the British intelligence agency, analysed the content. They confirmed that the message had been sent by an agent with the code name STW Stott from occupied Normandy shortly after D-Day in 1944. The strangest part is that the code has not been deciphered to this day. Not even the analysts at GCHQ have managed to interpret it. This suggests that the message used a one-time pad system, a technique that only works if the recipient has the exact matching code. Without that original key, it is nearly impossible to know what the text says. The discovery became international news. It was like opening a time capsule sealed by war, a real message that never reached its destination, a fragment of a secret mission frozen in time. The pigeons were not only useful, they were also brave. Many died in service. Some even received medals of merit for successfully delivering messages under enemy fire. The remains of this pigeon and the message it carried are now preserved at the Bletchley Park Museum. They are displayed as evidence of the ingenuity used to confront the challenges of war. The content of the message remains a mystery. No one knows for sure what it said or how urgent it was. As long as it remains undeciphered, it will continue to raise questions. Was it a warning about enemy troops? A coordinate? A key order? No one knows. The only certainty is that a small pigeon flew with important information and became trapped in a chimney, leaving behind one of the most singular unsolved secrets of the Second World War. The Nazi hideout found in a Hagen school after decades. In April of 2021, during renovations in the attic of an old school in the city of Hagen, Germany, a group of workers found something unexpected. As they dismantled part of the roof, they came across a hidden compartment inside one of the walls. In that hollow space, several carefully wrapped objects were stored. They weren't scattered or damaged by time. Everything appeared to have been placed there deliberately. Inside the hideout were swastika flags, armbands, portraits of Hitler, documents from the Hitler Youth, and Nazi propaganda books. Some were so well preserved that the colors still shone, as if they had just been placed there. The most striking thing was not just the contents, but how everything was organized. The items were arranged neatly, suggesting it wasn't an improvised stash. It was likely that someone had intended to preserve the material when the regime's defeat became apparent. The school where the cache was discovered had been used during the war as the local headquarters of the Hitler Youth. It was a meeting point for young people indoctrinated by the party. Local authorities believed that a staff member, or even an officer, may have hidden the objects upon realizing that the end of the regime was near. After the discovery, the items were turned over to the Hagen Municipal Museum. There, specialists began analyzing and preserving them. Although the contents weren't unique, the place and conditions of the find were. It is uncommon to find that type of material inside a public building, hidden and untouched. German historians noted that this case provided a direct view of how the regime's indoctrination worked. The artifacts weren't just symbolic items, but real tools used to shape young minds in Nazi ideology. Uniforms, texts, and manuals that helped explain how the system operated. The Hagen hideout was included in a temporary exhibition that traveled through several German museums. It focused on showing how the party infiltrated every level of society. A school, which should have been a place of ordinary education, was used for political purposes. This discovery also reignited the debate over what to do with Nazi propaganda objects. In Germany, private possession of such materials is strictly regulated, but museums are allowed to keep them for educational purposes. The goal is not to exhibit them as curiosities, but to explain what they represented at the time. The find was a reminder that traces of the past are sometimes closer than we think. There's no need for tunnels or ancient maps. Sometimes a hammer hitting an old wall is enough to uncover remnants of a history many thought was already buried. The air signs the stone message pilots saw from the sky. During the Second World War, while much of Europe was ravaged by bombings and battles, Ireland chose a different path. It declared itself neutral. It did not want to side with either the Allies or the Axis, but that stance brought doubts, pressure, and an urgent need to make it clear, even from the air, that the country was not part of the conflict. To make that message unmistakable, the Irish government ordered the construction of more than 80 huge signs along its coasts. They were words made of white stones and lime that simply read Éire, which is the Irish name for Ireland in Gaelic. The letters were between 10 and 12 meters long and were designed to be seen from the air by pilots flying over the country. They were not symbols or warnings. They were simple but highly visible notices. No fighting here. Although in theory the signs were meant to protect the country's neutrality, they also served as orientation points for Allied pilots. They helped to locate the coast, correct course, and avoid accidentally entering enemy airspace. Some historians suggest that Ireland, while officially neutral, did in fact secretly cooperate with the Allies. It shared weather data, tolerated reconnaissance flights, and even allowed the passage of certain British agents. The air signs became part of that delicate balance. On one hand, they signalled that Ireland didn't want trouble. On the other, they provided practical help to the Allies. It was like saying, we're not on anyone's side, while still allowing others to use the territory in a controlled way. Over time, many of those markers disappeared. Vegetation covered them, the wind eroded the lime, and some were directly removed. But others endured. Years later, in the 21st century, some people began rediscovering them. They used aerial photos, satellite images, and cliffside walks. This led to the reappearance of several signs, either intact or partially broken, but still legible. One of the best known is in County Wicklow. It sits on a green hillside facing the sea and can be seen from the air and from nearby trails. When the sun hits it from just the right angle, the white letters shine brightly. There is no explanatory plaque. It's just there, silently, as if the message still mattered. These signs were not weapons or hideouts, but they speak volumes about how a small country tried to survive without fighting. Amid the chaos, Ireland chose to make a stand with stones, not bullets. It didn't want to be invaded or ignored, just to make clear where its land began. Today, those letters are part of a story not always told. They show another way of participating in the war, by saying "not here" in letters so large that planes couldn't overlook them. The Yubot submarine cemetery in the Atlantic. During the Second World War, the Atlantic was a silent battlefield where German submarines, known as U-boats, patrolled beneath the surface to cut off supplies between North America and Europe. That ongoing struggle was called the Battle of the Atlantic. It lasted nearly the entire war and left thousands dead. The U-boats attacked without warning, sank ships and disappeared before anyone could fight back. But starting in 1943, detection technology advanced. Radar, sonar and depth charges changed the situation. Hundreds of submarines were sunk by the Allies. Many were lost at various points across the ocean, from the Irish coast to the Caribbean. The seafloor became a vast cemetery of steel. For decades, those sunken submarines remained undiscovered. Some locations were kept secret, others were simply forgotten. But in recent years, with better mapping, underwater robots and new historical research, several of those rusted hulls have been found. One of the best-known discoveries was that of U-576, located in 2014 off the coast of North Carolina. It lay over 200 meters deep. It had been sunk in July of 1942 during combat with an Allied convoy. It was surprising to see that the hull was still nearly intact. It looked frozen in time, as if it had just sunk. Another striking case was U-166, found near the Mississippi Delta. It had been sunk by an American ship shortly after attacking a freighter. When the wreck was located, both vessels were lying side by side, as if caught in their final confrontation. Many of these submarines still contain the remains of their crew. For that reason, they are considered war graves. Authorities usually choose not to disturb them. Only scientific teams are allowed to study them from the outside. Removing parts or exploring inside without permission is prohibited. In addition to human remains, some hulls preserve personal items, instruments, maps, and even canned food. Everything remains sealed by the pressure and cold of the ocean floor. These capsules from the past allow a better understanding of what life was like aboard a submarine. They were cramped, humid, dark spaces. Sailors lived underwater for weeks on end, in silence, awaiting orders. Thanks to recent discoveries, historians can better study naval battles. It also allows for tributes to be paid to those who died on those missions. They were not just soldiers, they were people trapped in a world of steel and water. Each sunken submarine has its own story. Some were lost to direct attacks, others were hunted on their way back to base, some simply vanished without a trace. Today, with new technologies, those stories are emerging one by one. The Atlantic holds thousands of secrets. Beneath its surface, in the darkness, rest the remnants of a war that was not always loud, but was just as deadly. The U-boats were symbols of terror at sea. Now, turned into silent wreckage, they tell their part of the story without words. Mengel's basement, what remained of his experiments in Auschwitz. In 1944, the train cars arriving at Auschwitz camp unloaded entire groups within minutes. As soon as they stepped off, the prisoners passed in front of a doctor who quickly decided who could be used for forced labor and who would be separated without explanation. Among those left standing, specific cases began to be selected. If someone was a twin, had a deformity, or was of very short stature, they were pulled from the group. These were the ones who interested Josef Mengele, one of the camp's doctors. He would approach, ask simple questions, request information, examine the children, and ask if they had siblings. If he saw something useful, he sent them to another area. Twins were measured, weighed, had blood samples taken, and were compared to each other. They were given different injections, some to observe reactions, others without any explanation. Sometimes fluids were applied to their eyes to attempt to change their color. If one of the two died, the other was executed so that he could be dissected and differences recorded. Some children underwent multiple surgeries without anesthesia. Everything was documented on sheets kept in folders. When the procedures were finished, what remained was sent to other sections for further analysis. There was no intention to heal, only observation and record-keeping. Those assisting were also prisoners. Some had prior experience in medical work, others simply followed orders. They had to record, move the children, or clean up the remains. They lived under constant threat. If one failed, they were replaced without warning. Compared to other parts of the camp, the children selected for these experiments received more food and slept indoors, but only while they were considered useful. When they no longer were, they were removed from the block. After the liberation, folders, notebooks, jars with remains, drawings with annotations, and photos of the process were found. There were logs with dates, names, and repeated markings that crossed between different cases. More than 1,000 children went through that program. Only a few managed to survive. Many believed they were being treated for something. Josef Mengele escaped as the war ended. He made it to South America and was never captured. Years later, human remains found in Brazil were matched to him, but no trial ever took place. His name remains tied to those experiments through the materials found in that basement. Before the Soviets arrived, some camp officials tried to burn or hide what they could, but instruments, sheets and jars were left behind, confirming everything that had been done. The Nazi fortifications left behind in the Channel Islands. In 1940, German troops took control of the Channel Islands, a group of British territories located just off the French coast. It was the only part of the United Kingdom that fell into Nazi hands during the entire war. Soon after occupying them, they began transforming the islands into a military zone. Guernsey, Jersey and Alderney were filled with defensive structures. They built concrete shelters, watchtowers, heavy artillery positions, underground tunnels, depots and buried bunkers. All of this was part of the Atlantic Wall, a defensive line meant to stop any attempted attack from the sea. To build these structures, they used prisoners and forced labourers. They worked with basic tools, no protection, and in long, grueling shifts. The treatment was brutal. In Alderney, they even built labour camps. The bunkers were made with thick concrete, often hidden among rocks or underground. Some had air systems, command rooms, ammunition storage areas, and corridors connecting them to other defences. From these points, beaches, hills and key roads were monitored. As the war went on, the islands continued to fill with new structures. The weaker Germany became, the more bunkers were added. But after France was liberated, the islands were isolated. No major battles occurred there. The surrender came in May of 1945. When the war ended, many of those bunkers fell out of use. Some were sealed off or used as storage spaces. Others were left exactly as they were and can still be explored today. In certain areas, the original structures are still visible. The Channel Islands clearly show how the regime prepared for an enemy landing that never happened. The defences reflect the scale of the military effort, even though they were never used in actual combat. Now, many of those constructions remain part of the landscape. Some are still hidden underground. Several have been restored and serve as memorial sites or museums. Although no heavy weapons were fired on those islands, the structures left behind reveal another side of the war, the constant fear of an invasion that never came. The Soviet plane buried in a Polish swamp. In a rural area of central Poland, some local residents were walking near a marshy zone when they spotted something metallic protruding from the ground. It was the body of an aircraft. The mud had covered nearly everything, but the shape was still recognizable. Inside were the remains of 2 people seated in their positions. They wore full uniforms. They had died in the crash. The aircraft was a Soviet Yak fighter, a low-altitude attack model. It was used for operations close to the ground where visibility was reduced. It was uncommon to find one intact after so many years. That's why the discovery immediately drew attention. The plane had not broken apart, only damaged by impact and time. Local authorities arrived at the site. They confirmed that the aircraft was from the Second World War. The engine was still in place. The identification plates were legible. There were no signs that anyone had attempted to move it before. Everything indicated it had remained there since the moment of the crash. According to military records, the plane may have been shot down in early 1945 during the Soviet offensive to push the Nazis out of that part of the country. Soviet forces were moving through Poland, driving the German army westward. During that period, many aircraft were downed by enemy fire or flight malfunctions. This one showed no visible bullet damage. It may have been a technical failure or perhaps an emergency descent that ended badly. The human remains were carefully removed. Forensic teams packed them and sent them to Moscow for identification. It was hoped that, if living relatives remained, they might reclaim the bodies. The uniforms bore military insignia, but no personal documents were found. DNA was the only way to determine who they were. The aircraft remained at the site for some time. Later, it was dismantled. Some parts were donated to a Second World War museum. The rest was stored. There were no plans to restore it, only to preserve what could be saved. It was not a common model, which made it valuable for historical display. Locals said there had always been rumors of a plane crashing in the area. Some elders recalled hearing an explosion in the final days of the war. No one had known for certain what had happened. With this discovery, the story that had remained buried beneath the swamp came to light. It was not an isolated case. In other parts of the country, remains of aircraft from that same front have also been found, mostly Soviet, though there are also reports of German and Allied planes. The mud, the cold, and the isolation of certain areas helped preserve remains that today serve to reconstruct details of the conflict. In this case, the most striking aspect was the condition of the fuselage and the position of the bodies. They remained seated, as if nothing had shifted since the day of the crash. That allowed a better understanding of how the flight ended. No black box, no witnesses, no reports, just mud, metal and bones telling what happened. The underground factory that served as a tomb in the Harz forests. In 1944, when Allied bombings were destroying more factories than Germany could replace, the regime decided to move weapons production underground. In the mountainous Harz region, prisoners transferred from Buchenwald were forced to dig more than 20 kilometers of tunnels. They were given oil lamps and pickaxes and made to break rock for hours on end, with no brakes and no safe tools. Inside those tunnels, rails, large machines, generators and electrical networks were installed. There, parts for cannons, tanks and components of the Messerschmitt 262 jet aircraft were manufactured. The air was nearly unbreathable. Stone dust made prisoners cough up blood, some walls buckled under pressure, and there were no quick exits. If a tunnel collapsed, no one got out. The lighting often failed. What remained was noise and shadow. Prisoners ate only if they met minimum production quotas. If they didn't complete the required number of parts, they received nothing. Every week, bodies were removed and replaced with others. Everything was interchangeable. When American soldiers arrived in April of 1945, they found powered-down machines, rocket remnants, tools scattered across the ground, and thousands of bodies lying among unfinished parts. The Army's engineering team managed to disable explosive charges that were still primed. Since that moment, remnants have continued to surface. Old munitions appear after rains or accidental digs. The main tunnels were sealed with concrete, but inside there remains poisoned dust, rusted parts and unstable explosives. Nothing is operational, but everything is still in place. Frozen machinery, broken bones and tools mixed with unfinished structures. That underground factory operated as a tomb until the final days of the conflict. Many of the traces shown in this journey were not recorded or located in any archive. They had no signs, no coordinates, no attached documents. They simply remained where they had been used, covered by earth, submerged, sealed within walls or buried beneath buildings. No one searched for them again. No one logged them. They only resurfaced when someone stumbled upon them by accident. Each one revealed what had remained in the same state since the day it was left behind. They were not symbolic remnants. They were real parts, not dismantled or removed. Some were still loaded with explosives. Others contained human remains. They made no noise. They didn't stand out. But they had not moved. Though more than 80 years have passed, there are still materials left unrecovered, structures unexamined and objects unclassified. They lie underground in unexplored areas, untouched and unmarked.